Hey folks, welcome back. Today's lecture is on mediation. So we talked about moderation already. Remember this idea of it depends. And when we talked about moderation, we talked a little bit more in detail about the stats that you look at for it. And then I provided some SPSS walkthrough, kind of here's what to look for, here's what to report. And today's going to follow a really similar pattern. We'll talk about, again, what mediation is, how we do it. Then I'll walk through it with you, show you some output, and also show you, instead of an Excel file for a graph, a figure mockup that I've made that should help us. So that's the plan for today. And remember, mediation has this because of relate idea. X leads to Y because of your mediator. In other words, the relationship between X and Y really doesn't exist without the mediator being there. So yeah, you could see that relationship without measuring the mediator, but in actuality, that's what's going on. So, job involvement leads to job satisfaction, which leads to intent to quit. In this case, job involvement is our X, intent to quit is our Y. So yeah, job involvement, or the lack thereof, leads to intent to quit, but it's because of job satisfaction. That relationship really wouldn't work unless you had job sat in there. So I'm going to start throwing out some terminology here. And at first, it may not make sense. I'm going to use terms like A path, B path, C path, direct effect, and indirect effect. We'll talk about what all those mean, and then I'll show you how to get them. So just kind of know that that's coming as part of this. But when we test mediation, we start off with kind of a simple relationship. What's our X and Y relationship? Here it's job involvement leads to lower intent to quit. The more you're involved with your job, the less you're likely to quit. But it's because of job satisfaction. More job involvement leads to more job satisfaction, which leads to less intent to quit. What we have here, this X and Y part, involvement to intent, is what we call our direct effect. Our mediated effect, we call our indirect effect. In other words, involvement goes to intent indirectly through job satisfaction. It's not straight across, it jumps up to job satisfaction, jumps back down to intent to quit. That A and B path is our indirect effect. So one way to think about this, and I know these are new terms, is A, B, and C are all basically regression coefficients. They're basically B weights. Involvement to satisfaction, that A is the regression between those. Job satisfaction to intent to quit, that B is the relationship between job sat and intent to quit, and our original relationship, X to Y, involvement to intent to quit, that's our direct effect, or our C prime path. That little apostrophe means prime. So what we'll do today is we'll walk through how to find all of these things. That way you can build it up for your own projects if you went the mediation route. So we have two major components. How do we test mediation? We look at our direct effect and our indirect effect. Now, I just want to go off on a quick tangent here. There used to be lots of different ways to do mediation tests. We're going to stick with the same macro, that process macro that we used for moderation. So we're not doing these regression coefficients separately. We're not doing a regression for A, a regression for C, and a regression for B. We're putting them all in one model to run it at once. So some of these terms you might have heard before. If you've ever heard of mediation, we're not doing them. We're updating. We're being a little bit more modern. Do you remember with moderation how we really looked at the interaction term? That is what told us whether or not we had a significant effect for moderation. Here, we're looking at our indirect effect. So just like we would immediately look to the interaction For moderation, we look to the indirect effect here to see, do we have mediation or not? And very similar to moderation, if we do, then we interpret that. If we don't, then we look at the main effects or just the main regressions. And remember, just to recap, I know a lot of you get it, but regression is just prediction. All we're doing with mediation is predicting an outcome. We're just focusing on the process by which we predict it, by that mediation. So the indirect effect is mediation. The main effect is the effect of each predictor, your independent variable and your mediator, on your outcome. Same as with moderation. It's just the other variables in the model, what's their individual effect. Now, mathematically, and again, we won't get into the math too much, but the indirect effect is calculated by taking that A path and multiplying it by the B path. Now, again, you don't need to do this. The computer will do it for you, but that's what's going on in the background is your indirect effect, or your test for whether or not you have mediation, is testing A times B and seeing whether or not that's significant, which makes sense, right? We're basically saying, does this A, the involvement to JobSat and JobSat to intent to quit, does that work? Is that significant? Well, we can find that out by taking that A times the B. So we're testing that whole mediation relationship. So more practically, how do we do this? Well, we use the process macro, and we use, model number 4 is what we should do. They switched it in the latest version of process, and that's screwing me up. We look at, we'll walk through it though. We look at the overall model, the R squared, and the significance. We can glance at the main effects. We don't really need to interpret them unless the mediation's not there. And then we look at the indirect effect. So you'll notice that this is kind of a lot of output, and we'll walk through this live again too. But you get 2 models, 1 and 2. This is confusing to people, and it rightfully so. The first model is only there to get the A path, as I've got marked out here. The second model, or the one lower, and the way to check that it's the second is that it has both predictors in here. That's important because it gets us our B path and also our R squared. So in this case, our R squared is 0.325. It's significant. Our A path is negative 0.54. Our B path is negative 0.57. Great. And then we get at the bottom of our output, our direct and indirect effects. And there should be an arrow here too. I'll make sure that's on there for the actual slides. Our direct effect, negative 0.07, is our C path. And our indirect effect is what tells us we've got mediation or not. You'll notice the indirect effect, and by the way, yeah, that's the same, that's good. We don't have a p-value for the indirect effect. So how did I know it was significant? We looked at the bootstrapped confidence intervals here. This is the lower confidence interval, 0.187, and this is the upper confidence interval, 0.4555. That's what tells us whether or not something's significant. Now, you guys are used to p-values, where you look at the sig value, like we have, you know, the p-value over here, and if it's less than 0.05, then it's significant. You know that, that's what you're comfortable with. This is a little bit new. And here's the easiest way to tell whether or not this is significant. You can write it out on just make a line, write it out and see, is 0 in here? And in this case, 0 doesn't fall between 0.18 and 0.45. Here's an easier, let me give you a hint though. Here's an easier way to do it. Look to see if the signs are the same. In other words, are both the lower and upper confidence interval positive, or are they both negative? If they're the same, you have a significant effect. If they are different, then you do not have a significant mediation or indirect effect. So in this case, our lower is positive and our upper is positive. The signs are the same, they're both positive, so we have a significant effect. If one was negative and one was positive, then we wouldn't have a significant effect. So don't worry too much about the 0 in there. Just think, are they both positive? Are they both negative? Good. Is one positive and one negative? Not good. So then we put this information into a figure. I have a mediation template up on D2L for you, where you pull out that A path, the B path, and the C path from your output, and then you put it into the graph. So it's not super hard. We'll run through it and you'll have the output. First thing you do is you look at the indirect effect. Same sign, mediation. Different signs, no mediation. You identify your A, B, and C paths. You get your R squared, you put it into a figure, and then you can write it up like this. So this is, again, important. The direct effect is the C path. The indirect effect you're going to get from the output as well. And like we did for moderation, this is a good template to use when you're writing this up for your own projects. If you can put it in here, you're going to be set. So let's actually walk through this. We're back to this data set, and let me double check my notes. Stress, sat, intent. The question you guys are testing is stress as the IV, satisfaction as the mediator, and intent to quit as the outcome. So let's do exactly that. Just like with moderation, we're going to go to analyze, regression, oh, there we go, and process. And I've already got these in here. Job stress is our IV, or our X variable. Intent to quit is our Y variable, and job sat is our mediator. We want to have model number 4. So for model number 4, this tells it it's mediation. Model number 1 was for moderation. And that's all we need to do. This is it. Put your variables in the right boxes, make sure it's model number 4, and hit OK. And we wait, and we wait. Just a little bit. There we go. Okay, let's draw your attention to a few things in the output before we dive in. First off, there's 2 model summaries. This is what I was talking about earlier. The first model up here is just to find the A path. The second model is where you get the R squared and the B path. And down here you get your direct effect, or your C path, and your indirect effect. So let's kind of walk through it. So let's start with model 1. Our A path is -0.54, and it's significant. And I'm by the way going to write this down because we're going to use this information later. So A equals -0.54. B, and remember B is the relationship between your mediator and your outcome. So in this case, from sat to intent to quit. By the way, this is another good way to check. What's our outcome variable? Our A path is job stress to job sat. So here's our predictor, and this is our outcome. That's how we know it's our A path. Our B path is satisfaction to intent to quit. So we look here. Sat, and our outcome is intent to quit. It's B equals -0.42. By the way, one tip that's really helpful is have a little drawing of your model next to you, just that triangle. That way you don't forget which variable is which. And if you get confused when you're looking through the models, you can always say, okay, this stress to job sat is my A path. I want this number. Sat to intent is my B path. I want this number. And then we want our X to Y path, or our direct effect. That actually is much easier to find because they label it well. It's negative 0.1199. That's actually non-significant. That's okay. That's totally fine. And finally, our indirect effect is 0.2298. And so is our indirect effect significant? Do we have mediation? Well, let's look. Our lower confidence interval is 0.1393. Our upper confidence interval is 0.3323. Is this, in fact, significant? Well, let's ask ourselves, are the signs the same? Are they both positive? Yeah, they are. That's great. So we have mediation. We have, so this is great. This is a great set of results. We have a significant mediated effect. The AB coefficient, or the indirect effect, is 0.2298. The lower confidence interval is 0.1393. The upper confidence interval is 0.3323. We're golden. We're set. And because we got our A, B, and C paths, we have all the information we need to put this in a chart. Let's do that real quick to kind of wrap this up, because if you're doing mediation, you're going to need to do this for your projects. Okay, what was our X variable? Our X variable was stress. Our mediator was satisfaction, and our outcome was intent to quit. By the way, again, this template is on D2L, so you can just literally fill this stuff in the same as I'm doing now. Our A path was negative 0.54, and it was significant. So I'm going to put a little star there because of this note, starring if it's significant. Our B path was negative 0.42, and it was significant. And our C path was negative 0.1199. I'm going to round off to negative 0.12. And then it's not directly in the figure, but I make a note here all the time of what the AB coefficient is. So the AB coefficient was 0.2298, so I'm going to round off to 0.23. And the confidence intervals, I need to go back and get these again, were 0.14 rounded off, oh gosh, and 0.33 for the upper. So 0.14, 0.33, rounding to 2 decimals. So 0.14, 0.14, 0.33, boom. That's all you need to do. That's it. Then you write it up. So instead of graphing it like we did for moderation, we just put our numbers in the figure. The biggest trick is always to make sure you're getting the numbers from the right places and interpreting them correctly. So again, I'll remind you, there's this video as basically walking you through for your own projects. And there's also those SPSS guides. And that's kind of it, folks. You're going to have a homework that's going to ask you one question on moderation and one question on mediation. That's all in one homework. And at this point, having done moderation and having done mediation, you'll be able to interpret that output and kind of do a trial run to see how well it's going. As always, reach out if you have questions, but that's sort of it for mediation. Remember, we look at, do we have mediation or indirect effect, our A, B, and C paths, and also the R squared, which is 0.28866, and it's significant. So to just as a quick summary, actually, for moderation and mediation, they both ask different types of questions. It depends versus the process. but don't be too intimidated or freaked out by them. There's very defined steps of how to do it and very defined things that you're looking for. So now that we've gone through that, don't view it as like this big scary thing. Just think back, what do we need to look for? What do we need to report? Put the numbers in the right places and decide, do you have moderation? What does it mean? Do you have mediation? What does it mean? And that's really it. So I'll be in touch soon. Well, you'll see another video soon, I'm sure. But until then, take care and good luck on the homeworks. That'll be up on D2L as well. All right, talk to you all later. Bye-bye.